My name is Mark Brown. I'm the Assistant Secretary Treasurer of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers Toronto Local and an Executive Board member of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists in Canada. The history of black workers in labor goes back to the transatlantic slave trade. As you know, we were brought to Canada and to other countries against our will and forced to provide our labor for free. Women and African Canadians entered the workforce in highest numbers in the 1940s. That was the time of the Second World War, and in the year 1940, black employment grew by about 150%. Unions were in existence at that time. However, they weren't very eager to represent black workers. Some unions openly barred black workers. Other unions had segregated locals. White people were in one local and others were in another local. And it's in this framework, it's in this environment that along comes a young man by the name of A. Philip Randolph. He sees this situation and he realizes and he recognizes that it's not okay. So what does he do? He starts a union. He organizes a union that represents black workers. And that gave birth to the Brotherhood of the Sleeping Car Porters. A. Philip Randolph is the president of the Sleeping Car Porters, which represents railway workers in the United States. The Canadian division of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters was led by Stanley Griswold. He was born in Toronto to Jamaican immigrants, and he was elected president of that particular union. Stanley Griswold represented the workers who worked for CP Rail, and he was known for petitioning the management at that time to hire black workers in the management. When we turn the page a little bit to the next chapter, we come across another young man by the name of Bromley Armstrong. Again, a Jamaican Canadian. He arrives in Canada in 1947 and struggles to get employment and deals with racism. He's mostly known for his participation in the occupations in Dresden, Ontario. And what was happening in Dresden, Ontario was that there were different restaurants that refused to serve black patrons. So he led sit-ins in that particular part of the province, and it's generally believed that the end results of those sittings resulted in legislation that led to the Human Rights Act that we have today. When we turn the page again, we get to 1972, and we get to the inception of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists as the next chapter in labor history. The Coalition of Black Trade Unionists is an independent voice of black labor in Canada. The coalition formed in 1972, and it was as a response to the U.S. labor movement's decision to take a neutral position to the re-election of Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon at that time was not seen as the best candidate for black issues. And as a result, the black labor leaders at that point came together and voiced their dissent, and out of that resulted in the birth of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. Approximately a decade later is when the Canadian chapter came on board. In 1987, Herman Stewart was elected as the Executive Vice President of the Ontario Federation of Labor. He was the first black person, first person of color to be elected to that position. At the following convention of the Canadian Labour Congress, the Congress had set aside one position for a person of color on their board. The Coalition of Black Trade Unionists wanted two positions. So a campaign was started at that particular convention entitled 1 + 1 = 2. And a button was made and given out to anybody who was willing to wear it. When all the smoke cleared, there were two positions set aside for people of color on the board of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, and that campaign actually gave birth to the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists Canadian chapter. Arabian vibration.